Most people believe science is objective, that facts sit outside human bias and experts simply reveal the truth. But when you look closely, science doesn't stand outside power, it often reflects it. What gets studied, funded and accepted follows patterns that look like neutrality, or less like neutrality and more like control. In this video we look at how science became the last unquestioned authority, and what gets hidden when objectivity becomes a myth. Talking of science, bloody great plane going over. Fucking RAF bastards. Anyway, so if science is shaped by the same systems it claims to measure, can it ever be neutral? Drugs and addiction, an anarchist perspective, Dickie Dredd. And we're on part 49 of the video series, and we now moved into chapter 5, Science, Scale and Lies. This chapter argues that modern science, often treated as objective truth, has taken on the role of a new belief system, complete with authority, hierarchy and unquestioned assumptions. It challenges the idea that researchers can stand outside what they study, showing instead how science is shaped by power, funding and political priorities. The chapter exposes how scale distorts truth. What looks rational at a laboratory or policy level often ignores lived human reality. In drug policy, this leads to, here they come again, sorry, training planes, training for the next war, the bastards. So in drug policy, this leads to data being used selectively. Evidence that supports control is amplified, while contradictory evidence is dismissed or reframed. Ultimately, the chapter claims that science has not escaped ideology. It has simply hidden it behind numbers. What presents itself as neutral and evidence-based is often deeply entangled with economic interests, state control and moral judgment. The result is not pure knowledge, but a system that legitimises certain narratives while silencing others, producing planes like that. Right, section 41 in chapter 5. The myth of objectivity, science as the last church. Every age invents its own religion. Medieval folk had faith, we have facts. The lab replaced the pulpit, the white coat the vestment. Science, once the art of asking awkward questions, has become a creed of certainty. It inherited all the trimmings of its predecessor, hierarchy, ritual, and the belief that it alone speaks truth. The myth of objectivity was born, the idea that humans can somehow stand outside the mess they're measuring. Paul Feyerabend warned half a century ago that science is not a closed system of truths, but a collection of practices sustained by power. He might as well have been talking about the politics of drugs. Challenge the myth and you're branded a heretic. The high priests of research have replaced the bishops. Their incense is the smell of giant money. When data contradicts dogma, the dogma simply rewrites the data. The fall of David Nutt, as explored later in section 42, and we talked about it earlier as well, was less an accident than a purification ritual. The priesthood of expertise survives by excommunicating anyone who points out the cracks in the altar. The myth hides an older story. Enlightenment, rationalism grew up alongside empire and industry. Measuring, classifying and quantifying were not just clever ideas but bureaucratic weapons, ways to control land, bodies and behaviour. The same urge that mapped continents soon to map the mind. Observing became a form of ownership. Foucault saw it in prisons. Latour traced it in laboratories. The experiment and the census share a lineage. Both claim to know you better than you know yourself. Drug science became the ideal stage for this moral arithmetic. Numbers gave authority. Dosage tablets, MRI scans, risk indices all projected the fantasy of neutrality. Yet each hid the same assumption. The experience can be boxed and measured. The subject vanished. The spreadsheet remained. Joy turned into anomaly. Pain into data. The scientist became a kind of confessor, offering redemption through quantification. What theology once called sin Science renamed risk and charged extra for the analysis. None of this means we should bin science, and I've been a scientist most of my life, so I wouldn't say that. Far from it. A genuine scientific spirit, the one that keeps poking reality with a stick, is anarchic at heart. It thrives on contradiction and laughs at its own mistakes. What passes for objectivity today may well be its opposite, curiosity turned bureaucratic. Funding panels, ethics boards and peer review have become the new inquisitions, rewarding conformity and punishing imagination. Furibund again, progress depends on breaking rules, not polishing them. The great discoveries, like the best parties, rarely begin with permission. Anarchist thought sees the parallel clearly. Both church and laboratory claim to mediate truth. Both depend on believers willing to kneel. But knowledge, like freedom, can't be delegated. It happens in the encounter, between observer and observed, between hypothesis and world. The most honest scientist admits their subjectivity, acknowledging that every observation is also interference. As I wrote in Practical Anarchy, to know is to participate, not to possess. So the task is not to junk science, but to liberate it, to return experiment to its roots in curiosity and humility. When inquiry becomes a conversation rather than a conquest, it starts to resemble the older forms of wisdom it once mocked. The microscope and the drum both serve the same end, the attempt to see and listen deeper. The next section asks what happens when this listening is silenced by numbers, when harm itself is legislated by decree and the myth of objectivity hardens into law. So the issue isn't really science itself, it's the belief that it stands outside power. When objectivity becomes unquestioned, it stops being a tool for understanding, it starts becoming the tool for control. So if the data we trust is shaped by the systems around it, how do we decide what's actually true? In the next video we look at what happens when the objective science starts defining harm itself and how numbers get turned into law. And we'll look at the Class A, B and C systems and see if they make any sense, which they clearly don't. Chapter 5. So next up is still Chapter 5, Science, Scale and Lies, but will be Section 42, the harm scale and the hierarchy of truth.